dropped off this week. That's always a worry for the professor, but I'm glad you guys are here. Thank you for being here. So we're in the week of talking about Methodism and Black Methodists, and focusing on that section of the Black religious experience, Black Christian history. And it goes, from early times when Methodists started evangelizing Africans all the way up until the current day. And that it's just really important to have a sense of, there is this one general grouping of experiences that is unique to Black Christianity, and that's Black Methodism. So let's talk. Let me get a clue from you. Tell me about. Here comes Jamal. Tell me about what. Each of you kind of give me one thing that you think is a memorable piece of Black Methodism that is important for us to remember. That you might think the old man might put on an exam or something like that.
Well, in my rereading of the Pen and Pen, I found one interesting fact of the development of written material for literacy and educational value that was emphasized by the AME Church.
Yeah. So they started making sure people know how to read, and then they started publishing books and Sunday school curriculum and all that kind of stuff, right? And why would that be important?
To me, it was important because it was more of a liberating value for Blacks to understand the true meaning of the Bible, where whites were afraid that it would give them too much independence and cause rebellion within them.
Right. Yeah. So a lot of slave owners refused to allow them to learn to read and write because A, they're too stupid to do it, and B, once they did learn, they might get uppity about it. Exactly. All right. Who else has got an interesting piece of this reality that we're looking at for Black Methodism? I can wait. If we're shut up, if we don't say anything long enough, the professor will get anxious and he'll talk instead of we having to. Not today.
I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I dove into it because I didn't. So I'm not going to.
Okay. You haven't had a chance to read it. That's fine.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell you that I have because I haven't. I'm not going to lie to you.
All right.
But I'll be honest.
You what?
I won't disappoint.
That's good. Do you know any Black Methodists?
Honestly, yeah, I do, but I haven't seen her in years. It was a lady that I worked with, and I actually thought it was weird. I was younger, and I worked with her, and like I said, I was younger, so I don't know why we was discussing church, or I don't know what I don't remember the conversation, but she, what church you go to, what church you go to, that type of thing. And then when she told me the name of her church, and she was like, it's Methodist. So, you're kind of like, huh? Because for me, everybody was always either Baptist or Pentecostal,
Right.
you know. So I never actually met a Black Methodist. I always honestly thought that it was a white, a white church. That's where like I said, I was
Yep.
younger,
Yep.
but as I became older, and that's when I think it was my dad that broke down the AME to me and all that, what it actually meant. But yeah, I did.
That's the more important piece of it. That it's not as common to be Methodist as to be Baptist or Pentecostal. Yeah, exactly right. So Jamal, what are the three main Methodist denominations in Black Church? You're muted, Betty.
Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. Okay. The three main denominations in Black. So we have AME is one, right?
Right.
And then we have I believe it's African. Well, no, hold on, that's AME. We have AME, and then we also have.
I know the answer.
Oh yeah.
Bail him out, Lucretia.
It's AME.
Mhm.
It's AME Zion.
Yeah,
Zion, yeah.
And then it's CME.
right. Thank you. Exactly. And what do the initials stand for in those names?
AME is African Methodist Episcopal.
Right.
AMEZ is African Methodist Episcopal. Is it Zion?
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And then CME is it it's I don't know CME. This is my first time hearing CME.
Right, I'm not that familiar with it either.
Okay.
Dr. Sawyer.
Tell me, Walter.
Originally it was called the Colored Methodist Episcopal Church, but later it was changed to the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church.
Right. Right. All right. So what part of the world, what part of America did those start in?
Africa.
AME started in, was it in the north and was it in New York?
Yeah, that was in Philadelphia.
Philadelphia, yeah, I'm sorry.
That's all right. We're getting this. Where did AME Zion start? North or south? What you get?
I'm going to say south.
Well, I'm going to say south.
Yeah, actually CME is in the south.
Okay.
In terms of where they started. AME Zion started in New York City.
Okay. That was interesting.
And these two started, AME and AME Zion started earlier, much earlier, in the 1700s. Right after, well, let's see, there was a major historical event in the middle 1700s. Started about 1776 and finished up in, early 1780s. What did they call that thing?
It's the Revolution. The
Yeah.
American Revolution.
Yeah.
Oh.
The American Revolution or the War for Independence, right?
When they signed the Declaration of Independence, so yeah.
Right. Yeah. So there was a big war between America, the American colonists, and their parent country, which was what?
The French.
What European country?
Great Britain.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It was the English, the British, exactly. And so a whole lot of our traditions come from the English colonial experience, which is part of why we get to how we get to Methodist. When did the CME start? Walter, did you discover that? Approximately.
I muted myself here by accident. I'm sorry. Because I was reading on it. Because I know there was, wait a minute. I want to know, would it be 1870?
Yeah, yeah. After the Civil War.
Okay. Because when it was changed to Christian Methodist was 1956, I believe.
Yeah. Something like that, yeah. So it's very interesting. The AME and AME Zion churches started right after the Revolutionary War, when there were still lots of slaves and slaveholders in the South particularly, but also in the North. A lot of the folks in the North were freed slaves. But so why did they, so these folks were originally going to the white Methodist churches, right? Which is called the Methodist Episcopal Church. Why did they stop going to the white Methodist churches? I'll give you a clue. It wasn't because they just wanted to be with their own kind, which was the explanation my parents gave me when I was a kid in small town Illinois. Why do all the black folks live on that side of the town?
Right.
Well, they like to be with their own kind. Well, that's baloney, I now know. That's the only place they were allowed to live. So, anyway.
Was it because of the freedom they were given in the church?
So how does that play out? Say some more. That'll get you there, I think.
No, when I remember one of the main attractions about the church was that the African American slaves enjoyed the baptism part, which was reference to their traditional purity of water ceremonies.
Right.
It was dude, my sister,
So that's why they were attracted to the Methodist Church in the first place.
Go to the gym.
See if I can mute that stuff.
The purity of water ceremony. They also looked at it because of the freedom of how they were able to preach and
right.
the spirit of possession.
So that's why they were attracted to the Methodist Church in the first place, the white Methodist Church.
Right.
Why did they leave the white Methodist Church is what I'm asking.
Oh, and we discussed this last week.
I believe we did.
Members of the church were frustrated with how they were treated in the church, how they could only receive prayer and communion last.
Right.
But what made it volatile was during one ceremony, one of the members was physically removed because he went down to prayer early, and they were telling them that they weren't allowed until after all the white parishioners had gone first.
Right. Yeah, they yanked him up off. He was on his knees in prayer in the sanctuary with everybody else, and they yanked him up and said, "You can't pray here." And all of the black folks walked out at that day. On that day, that was
Philadelphia.
What?
Was that the church in Philadelphia where that happened?
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. And that was the what was that? St. George's Methodist Episcopal Church, yeah.
Yes.
So they went down the street and formed their own church, which they called Bethel. And eventually they organized lots of churches into the new denomination, which they call the African Methodist Episcopal Church, to distinguish themselves from the Methodist Episcopal Church, which was a white denomination. Yeah. So they finally had it and walked out. Same thing true in New York with the folks at John Street Church. They were not allowed. They got, as the number of black folks coming started getting so many that the white folks were getting uncomfortable. They started restricting where they could sit and what they could do, and they finally had it with that, and they walked out. Who was the bishop of the white church at that point who encouraged the black folks to form their own churches? Is an important name in Methodist history, both black and white.
Oh yeah, it was
Hi Kim, glad to see you.
Thank you.
It's not Richard Allen. Who is it?
He was the first pastor of that AME church in Philadelphia.
Would it be Bishop Asbury?
Yeah. Francis Asbury.
I remember that because I spelled his name wrong on my paper.
Yeah. I thought maybe that was spell check that got it wrong. Anyway, great. Richard Allen was the first pastor of the Philadelphia church. And he was ordained as the first black preacher in that church by Francis Asbury, first black elder. Right. So all of that happened in the late 1780s, 70s, and 80s, after the Revolution, and then expanded from there. But that was the North. Now in the South, black folks continued to be part of the white Methodist churches in the South until after the Civil War. And what was the period of time after the historical period of time after the Civil War, where black folks were given their freedom and they were encouraged to vote and participate in the civic life of America? What do we call that period?
Segregation.
Is that the Great Awakening?
Nope.
No.
That was the revivals way earlier.
No, that's not it.
What is it, segregation? What is it? What's the question? I'm sorry, Dr. Sawyer.
That's right. So before we get to the Jim Crow segregation, there was a period of 8 years after the Emancipation Proclamation that there was general proclamation of freedom for black folks and promise of economic equality and civil equality. Federal troops maintained that in the South. And so that was that period of time has a particular name. Starts with an R. Here's where I'm trying to tie into all of the general historical events, like the wars, and the Great Awakening is a good one.
Is it Reconstruction?
Exactly.
Okay.
Reconstruction. What do you remember? Anybody know what happened during Reconstruction? How was that? So Ta-Nehisi Coates in his neat book titled his book, "We Were 8 Years in Power." And black folks were given the right to vote. And in the South, there were more of them than there were white folks, and they elected black folks to Congress, and they elected black folks as mayors, and they elected black folks to city councils. And these folks were smart, and they were capable, and many of them were educated, and they were making life better for their people as a result of their being in power. It was about the end of that period of time. And so there was the promise of a mule and 40 acres for every emancipated slave. And there was lots of promises made, and there were federal troops in the South to try to make that happen. And then that ended. And then is the period that you mentioned, Jamal, and that's we have a particular name for that next era called Jim Crow, right?
Right.
And the white folks had had it up to here with black folks being in power, and they made everything possible to eliminate that. They changed voting laws. They organized posses and vigilante groups to scare blacks away. That's when lynching started. That's when they made sure that people couldn't own their own land, so they had to sharecrop. They created a justice system where people could be picked up for just about anything and put in chain gangs and made to do the work that the former enslaved people did. That all happened about 1872-3, somewhere in there. And that period had lasted until the Civil Rights Act and the Civil Rights Movement of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. So about 100 years of Reconstruction. I mean, of Jim Crow, right? Now, it's in that period of time.
Line again, I'm so sorry, Doctor.
Yes, ma'am. Ask the question again.
Can you give that timeline of Jim Crow? It was from...
I don't remember the exact dates, 1870s to 1950s and 60s.
There, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. And here's where you as with historical perspective, I just want you to have a general sense. You don't have to know the exact dates. Kind of said about when did this happen and what happened before and after.
Gotcha.
So the civil rights movement, which we'll talk about later in this semester, happened after the Second World War, after the Korean War, and then society was changing as a result of all that kind of stuff. And more educated black people were saying, we got to stand up for our rights. Now that came later to try to reverse Jim Crow, reverse the negative economic and civil rights positions that had been going on for a long time. And that had major impact on the churches as well. So it was during that, just at the time of changing into the Jim Crow time, that the Southern Methodist Church, and you don't need to necessarily remember this, but in the middle of the early 1830s, the Methodist Episcopal Church in America split into two, North and South. Other major white denominations also split into two. We now have an American Baptist Convention and a Southern Baptist Convention of the white folks, right?
Mm-hmm.
We had Southern and Northern Presbyterians, we had Southern and Northern Episcopalians, we had Southern and Northern Lutherans. And they, basically the question was, can you be a Christian and own slaves? And depending on how much of your economy depended on slaveholding and free labor in order to get you rich, your Christianity got nicely compromised by your economic realities.
Right.
So the South pulled out of those denominations. So the Southern Methodist Church realized that they had a lot of black folks who wanted to be Methodists. It was getting less and less comfortable to have churches full of white and black folks. They just soon not. So they said, let's make it possible for our black Methodist sisters and brothers to have their own churches. So they set up, in effect, the possibility for the Christian, what the colored Methodist Episcopal Church to start around the 1870s. That's the context, the historical context for that creation of what's going on now. So yeah, so remember CME started in the South. And in that, also the other reason for creating the white Southern Methodists creating the separate black churches is that the AME and AME Zion churches were sending missionaries into the South to try to attract black folks to become parts of those denominations. And that's competition for the South white Methodists, and they're trying to create their own, basically, market zone for their own denomination. The CME Church was very carefully supported by the white Southern Methodists. They got financial support and encouragement, but we were allowed to be completely separate. And they created their own church with their own rules. What else do we know about the CME? Anything else pop up from your experience or your reading in Pen and Pen?
Unlike the AME Zion, their idea of women in the pulpit reflected almost exactly with the AME Church when it came to women in the pulpit.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It is very interesting. Penn and Pim make a big point of when the black churches got established, the patriarchy, male dominance, took over, and the men said, no, women are not supposed, they read the Bible literally, and said women are not supposed to preach or teach. They're supposed to stay silent in church. That's one of those places where you take this is my personal, not about me alone, but my personal view is you take the passages of the Bible that support your prejudice.
And you flip it.
I like that. So that's what Jesus says. So that's what we have to do.
I mean, that's happened everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
That's, Pope getting slaves in Portugal, everything is that personal interpretation, because you often wonder exactly where does that read? And, you find it, well, this version of the Bible said it, well, this version, but,
Yeah. Exactly.
But Dr. Sawyer, I don't mean to interrupt you.
That's all right.
Was this only the black? Were there women preachers and teachers in the white Methodist Episcopal?
Not too much. The whites were earlier getting women ordained, but not a lot.
Okay.
That's a good question. Probably no, because patriarchy is just big in our society. Male dominance, carefully guarded and protected. The Southern Baptists are still very clear that women can't preach, women can't teach a man. Women can teach women, you just can't teach men. They can't serve on the boards, etc., because they're literal interpretation of the Bible. So you're right. That's just there.
Wow.
And when we get to talking about civil rights and liberation theology, we'll start to see that it gets harder and harder to separate out one group of people's rights from anybody else's.
Yeah.
And so we'll talk about that. Remember, hang on to that one. But at this point, yeah, women were slow to get any, but women were doing so much of the work and supporting the church, and as is still often the case. That's a good point.
Because the author in Pen and Pen was saying that according to the AME Zion, that they could no longer look away from a majority of the work and the growth of how many women there were in the church.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That women were really becoming the main focus in the church and guiding it.
So if you look at the timelines, there's 3 different timelines in the Pen and Pen chapter on Methodism. Each one of them gives a time when they started ordaining women, and they name the woman who was ordained at that period of time. So you can begin to see how and when that started to happen. AME, AMSE, and Zion, and CME. Exactly right.
Another thing I found interesting as I went back through this was the dissension that started being in the church. The AME and the AME Zion against the CME.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that. I don't know about it.
On page 56.
Oh, I should know about it, but there.
On page 56 in Pen and Pen, I'll read what's here. It says the denominations connected to the Methodist Episcopal Church in the South had that the CME had more benefits than the rest of the churches. And basically, both the AME and AME Zion ministries embarked on trying to exercise and attempt to take over the CME church.
Yeah.
That's what
because they felt that the church was too closely related to slavery.
Mm-hmm.
Its financial backings.
That's a paragraph I didn't remember having read, but there it is. Yeah.
Yes, the first paragraph.
And then so there was this almost a liberation movement at that point, saying, you really want to continue to be a part of a church that's supported by your white former slaveholders. Yeah, I can see that. Makes sense.
But it's almost like hating, if we call it the modern day, because AME and AME Zion were kind of ousted. You know, they didn't get the, hey, we wish you well. They were like, it's too many of y'all got to go.
Right.
Whereas, like you said, the CME, they were like, well, we want to help you. Let's get you a building. Let's get you financially situated. So the North, as you say, the missionaries came down to try to gain followers, but CME, like you said, they were really kind of being supported. So of course the North is going to say, well, it's like slavery, because they came from free states.
Yeah.
So is that actually true if they're following the same doctrine? It seems like the other one is just saying, oh, the white man's still helping y'all and the white man put us out. Is that kind of no?
If you read to the chapters leading up to 56, the South was willing to do this because their basic ideology of it was, well, you need to be with your own kind.
Yeah.
We're willing to give you this if you just go away.
Yes.
Right. Get in your place. Yeah.
So, you know, I can look at the jealousy and animosity in it, but
because
you know,
AME didn't get any help. It was just y'all too many. Y'all sitting in the back balcony. Y'all got to figure this out.
Yeah. Now that of course this is, 100 years later, of course, not the same people, but that's a remnant in that. And competition, Christians are not immune from jealousy and competition. I've noticed this.
We African, y'all colored. That mindset.
Yeah. Maybe. And the culture of America, the colonial culture of America is you got to win no matter what. So if you go down there and think you got a missionary enterprise to get more Black folks into your church, then you feel like you're winning if you could take over some other churches. That's a little colonial leftover as well. Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you.
But I felt by reading that you could look at the two sides of the coin.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because one, they looked at you as aggravators coming from the North.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't want you there. But on the other hand, you look at it as the whites in the South saying, okay, I don't want you to take over my church. We're going to give you something.
Mm-hmm.
We want you to have it. Just to keep our own. We feel it's best that we give you this.
Mm-hmm.
That's the white's perspective, right?
So
what would be the perspective of the members of the CME church at this point? They probably can understand that their northern counterparts are saying, wait a minute, you're compromising yourself with these former slaveholders. What would make them want to stay connected with their CME church? What would be going on in their minds about that? That's an important historical question I hadn't thought about till just now.
Wouldn't it be the financial stability?
Yeah, say some more.
Well, you number one, you still are around these people. You don't want to make issues as far as still, challenging them. They still white folks and you still Black folks. And you don't want any type of circumstances. So not to say, but to say, you're going to take the 40 acres and a mule and make good of it.
Yeah.
Who are these AMZ people to come up from the North and come down here and ridicule? Because normally from the North, that was the help. When the Northern Army came, it helped us in the South. Right. Anything coming from the North is helping us. And now you come down here and you're really ridiculing us.
What could we also look at it as? Probably once this freedom was given to these Blacks in the South to have their own church, they began to form an attitude that when the AME and AME Zion came to the South, that they began to take on the attitude of their former slave owners, that these people were agitators.
Could be. Yeah. And there's here's a question, because I don't know that from the inside, because as a white person, but is there a reality in the South for Black folks that this isn't ideal? There's a whole lot that we don't like about our situation, but it's what we got now. We have just enough of our freedoms. We've got our lives. We have our church. We're getting supported. It's it is the compromise we've made in order to make our lives the way it is now. Don't rock the boat. Is that real?
Because the CME still believe in slavery. Y'all making us money. Christ said love you, but y'all still, so when they still had the part, it was in their mindset that the mindset of the slave owner.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still superior to Black people, like you said. I'm sure even though it wasn't Jim Crow, they were still lynching people. They were still, coming. So it's like, who y'all Northerners, don't disturb this. We good.
Right. Yeah.
And that's current day.
Yes. Okay. That's what I was thinking. I think that's
yes.
That's a relatively prominent mentality among a lot of folks.
You at the sundown, you stay on that side of the railroad track. Yeah. Don't, yes, to this day. They believe in Christ, but smaller towns.
Yeah.
But, adding to what you said, we also look at it as that they were looking at what was best for their community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the piece of it. Yeah. It is relatively peaceful now. We have the lives we have, and it could be a lot worse if we start raising trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so
but why did white Methodists run the AME out?
Why didn't they?
Yeah, it's like giving these Negroes, they happy, y'all going back up north.
There may have been, I don't know. That's a good piece. You can make a doctoral research out of that someday.
No.
Your slave voice is killing me.
This what?
Miss Kim and her slave voice is killing me.
Nah, y'all did.
Seriously. Because even in these conventions today, you still have this, well, we from the North, like you said, the North Conference, the Southern Conference.
Yeah.
It is still, once again, the division of Black people through religion. We better. Y'all down there weak. We got stronger ministers. Y'all down there. It's like, what?
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, we'll look for that again next week when we're talking about the Baptists.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah. So now there's any other questions about the three main Methodist groupings and that history? Before I want to move to another piece of Methodism that I want you to be aware of.
Didn't CME finally drop CME or C and go to AME?
No.
Didn't they start calling themselves colored?
They stopped calling themselves colored and started calling it Christian.
Oh, okay. They weren't leaving at C.
Yeah, they kept the C, but they just changed it from colored to Christian, and that happened actually in the 1930s. And the speaker the other night said that there was a lot of debate, and it was a pretty close vote whether we dropped the C or not. Yeah. So
Christian it is, Lord. That was, yeah.
So another element of Methodism that Penn and Penn don't talk about, and that is how do the Methodist churches organize themselves? And this is unique to Methodism, and we'll see how this ties back into the history from the Reformation and all the way back. What does the word Episcopal mean in its root? Somebody look that word up and see what it means.
It means bishop.
Yeah. Exactly. Did anybody find the derivation of that word from the Greek? I think it's under bishop though. I'll just quick tell you. Epi means over, or before. Scopal, S-C-O-P-A-L, is just like the word scope, means the overseer or the overwatcher. So the bishop, and bishop is one of the words that's used in the Greek Bible for leaders of the early church. And so the Greek would be episkopos. So the Episcopal Church is a church known by, or it's run by bishops. And so what we have here, and this is, I'm giving you my little chart for those of you who can see the screens, and I'll also post it so you can see it later. This is a chart of with the way that I think this is mainly the AME church, but all three Methodist groups are pretty much organized this way. They have bishops, and I'm sorry, and what we understand by structure or governance is about decisions. How are they made, and who can make them? Every human organization, this is my anthropological overall thinking organizationally, every human organization has organized itself so that it's clear who can make decisions and what decisions they can make. All right. And then churches have organized themselves in just the same way. So here's how the Methodist churches is organized. The white Methodist churches are organized this way as well. And in fact, the Black Methodist churches have adopted and adapted the rules, the constitution of the white Methodist Episcopal Church. They just brought it in, changed the language, and made sure it's clear about that this is our church and not their church. Nonetheless, it's pretty much the same rules. So there is a general conference, the gathering of representatives from all over the church. That conference elects people to be bishops. And these people are the highest, I'm looking here, these people are the highest deciders in the church. So there are a number of regions divided. They divide the church into general regions, 2 or 3 or 4 states together, and they appoint a bishop to be the decision maker for everything that goes on in that region. And then the bishop appoints, and the people are ordained to the bishopric, appoints presiding elders. That's the orange group next here. And each of those people presides over a district. And so they divide those regions into smaller geographical areas. And so a subordinate middle manager is in charge of those. The bishop and the presiding elders appoints the ministers for 2 particular congregations. And in the Methodist churches, the ordained ministers who have the seniority to be a pastor of a church are called elders, all right? And so if you have the Asbury African Methodist Episcopal Church somewhere in some little town or a city, the bishop and the presiding elder appoints a pastor to that church for a 1-year term. And they can renew that as often as they want to. And then they will move that elder pastor to another church. and appoint a different pastor to be part of that church. The members of those congregations, so the little oblong things down here at the bottom are the congregations themselves. So each congregation gets a pastor and elder. They get some consultation with the presiding elders about who they might appoint as their pastor, but the decision is made by the bishop and the presiding elders. The people
like Catholicism.
Say what?
Like Catholicism almost.
Bingo. Yeah.
The Pope gives down to. Yeah.
In the Catholic Church, instead of a general conference, they have the Pope at the top.
Yeah.
And the Pope appoints the bishops.
Yeah.
And the bishops, they don't have sub-bishops in the Catholic Church, but they have gradations of bishops actually. But it is, and there's a word for this kind of structural organization. You know what that word is? Starts with an H.
I don't want to get put out of class and taken to the principal's office, so I'll be quiet.
Since when did you get chicken about those things?
No, because it's my humorous side, and it's not time to be humor.
Okay, all right.
I'm sorry, Dr. Sawyer. So I want to ask a question. So the little orange dots are the elders, right?
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I was saying.
No, yeah, thank you. I didn't say that specifically. Yeah. So if there's, 15 churches in a district, the presiding elder looks over and helps those churches make the decisions they need to make, and pretty much can say what they can and can't do about a lot of stuff, right? And the pastors and the elders have a whole lot more power than a lot of churches, and probably in some Baptist churches as well, because they are appointed from above. So the fancy word for this Episcopal, I can't talk and spell at the same time, is hierarchy, right? Now, where does the organizational form of hierarchy, where did that start? This was taught by the crazy old white man who teaches History of Christianity 1. But you haven't taken that class yet. I hope maybe you can take it this fall. The source of this hierarchical, which is a pyramid, right? That form of organization was created by the Roman army. The Roman army had the emperor, and then the generals, and then the majors and the corporals, and then the enlisted people. It was a pure pyramid. It all starts from the top, and you only take the orders that you're given from the top.
Is that the time that they thought that the Pope had too much power? Or
what about the Pope and power?
Didn't they devise this because they realized that the Pope himself had too much power? And so in removing it from one person, they developed a systematic approach, or no? No,
this actually reinforces that. The guy at the top has absolute power.
Okay.
And then he, in the Catholic Church, and in early times, it was always men. He tells the people down below what they can and can't do, and on down. And if he says jump, they just jump. Absolute power.
Dr. Sawyer?
Yes.
On the schematic and how you were talking about how the ministers are moved around, because I have an in-law who is part of the church, a Zion church.
Okay.
And I've often wondered, what is the purpose of, after a year or 2 years of moving these ministers around?
Mm.
Because I had talked to many people, and they may find a minister that they enjoy a great deal,
Mm-hmm.
and then after a year or two he's gone somewhere else, and they bring in somebody who really does not make the church feel enthusiastic or forward.
Yeah.
I'm kind of puzzled by it, because I've heard it before, about, we wish so and so was still here, but they done took him to another state, and they brought this person in, and
Right.
don't feel I am properly being fed by his message, and and they endure, they go through this, what can be said as a merry-go-round, or chess puzzles being moved.
Yep. So you want me to tell you what I think that's about?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
It is about the whole being more important than the subparts. That's how hierarchies work. It is so the Episcopal Church model of church government or church decision making is also called hierarchical, but it's also called connectional, because everything is connected to everything else. No independent congregation is independent. It's all. So if the bishop decides that a church in Akron, Ohio needs a particular kind of pastor now, and we see that kind of pastor is right over here at Bethel AME Church, whatever, bishop could say, we're just going to plunk that person right over there, because the whole church needs this overall look, regardless of what the people at Bethel think.
Would it also be, Dr. Sawyer, to the prevention of power? If you have this church and you begin to financially build it through the tithes, and it's earning more than the other churches, or the structure of it's getting more solid, would it be that?
It also, it does. You're right. It prevents anybody from building a little kingdom in a congregation, right?
Wow.
They also
after class, you're gonna have me talking to squirrels in the park. I'm not gonna, man.
Stay away from U of L, man.
I mean, because when you begin to look at religions, it's like, wow.
Right.
Okay. Now, so this get your head around this, because this is the way Episcopal churches are organized, Catholic churches are organized, and the Methodist churches are organized, and to some degree, the Pentecostal churches are organized this way. It is a straight historical line. Now, remember, I keep talking about how do you see how things are connected?
Yeah.
What you see is the historical straight line from the Catholic Church in Europe that developed this form of hierarchical organization in order to make sure everybody is controlled and does what they're supposed to do, because it's a matter of rules and regulations, and that's more important, and right belief, and that's more important than individual freedom. In the government, remember we talked about this guy by the name of Charlemagne.
Yeah.
Remember old Charlemagne? He was a Catholic boy. He took over as the new Holy Roman Emperor, and he used the hierarchical form of his army and his government to ensure that everybody would become good Catholics by violence if necessary. So now, okay, so how come the Methodists have an Episcopal form of church government? Go back and think about the history we've gone through from the Reformation. We mentioned this on Monday. We mentioned the connection anyway in Monday. Trace it back. So we got the Methodists down here and the Black Methodists. Who started the Methodist Church in England?
John Wesley.
Wesley, all right.
Mm-hmm.
What denomination was John Wesley a part of?
Anglican.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Church of London, or was it? Church of England?
Yep. Church of England, also known as the Episcopal Church. Who started the Anglican Church? Who was the reformer that set that in motion?
Oh.
Hold on.
This is me expecting you to keep things in your head. I know it's not fair.
No, we got that somewhere.
I'm glad I write a lot.
Man.
You knew this. You knew this for the midterm.
Yeah. Look.
It was a king, by the way. There's a little hint. Yeah, Henry VIII.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Henry VIII, who didn't like the Pope telling him what he couldn't do because he wanted to get divorced. And so he created his Anglican Church, but it wasn't that different from the Catholic Church. He just changed a few things, but mainly instead of the Pope being in charge, the king was in charge. He kept a hierarchical form of the church with bishops and so on. So you start with the Catholics. Henry VIII just amended it a little bit to create the Anglicans. John Wesley was an Anglican. When he created the Methodist Church, he didn't change the organizational form of the church. He made it exactly what he was used to, which is Episcopal, hierarchical. And now we have Black Methodists who are using this European colonial form of hierarchical organization to run their churches. And no wonder your head is spinning from that, because there's a lot of ways that's incongruous.
Because the AMEs then need to sit their tails down, because they running all the way from Europe and they looking down on the CMEs, when in truth.
That's also true, yeah. They've still borrowed a whole bunch of white stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
wow.
One of the things I want you to continue to be skeptical about is to keep watching as you're looking at the history of the development of Black church, how much of colonialism is still seeped into church life today.
Yeah.
Yep.
Dr. Sawyer, I got a question.
Good.
That up. Would the financial problems that affected the AME and the AME Zion Church and not the CME, can it be pinpointed to where they stood by the doctrine of the original Episcopal Church when it began? And that could be where some of the animosity and jealousy came from?
I'm not sure how that works. I don't quite see that yet. Tell me some more.
Well, when you read in Pen and Pen, it describes the financial troubles that the AME and AME Zion carried for years when it first started.
Yeah.
And how we talked about here today where the CME, with the backing of the Southern Methodists, flourished financially. Could we look at that because of how the AME and AME Zion took a stance and stood fast on the doctrine of the Episcopal Church. Could that have been one of the problems of them financially in the beginning?
Well, I don't think they changed the doctrine that much from one or the other.
Because when you read it, they complained about financially how they, the black churches of AME and AME Zion struggle.
That's simply because the white church wouldn't help them any. And if you have a community of people, none of whom can get good jobs and get ahead in life, there's not going to be a lot of money in that community to support a church. So the black church is going to be poorer than a white church.
Okay.
That's all that is. That doesn't make any difference if it's Methodist or anything else for that matter.
But Dr. Sawyer, wouldn't the financial stability be better in the North for Black people because of the factory? People from the South migrated to the North because of that.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't
Later, of course, in the Great Migration, but yes. And people who migrated north to escape slavery. There would have been, but if they still didn't have the financial support from the white church, they still would be behind, is my guess. I think that's what it's about. Yeah. It's the same story. Third verse, same as the first. Yeah. Good questions.
I got one more question. I came late full of questions.
That's good. I like it.
No, it's not. Can you please, because now can other denominations, did they borrow the name Bishop? Because when you have Bishop T.D. Jakes, and he is over, the Potter House is over, but how, this is almost a $1 billion revenue. Right. How can he remain bishop and under him when the other bishops we don't hear being that lucrative? And I could be totally wrong. Yeah. Is he part of the Methodists, or did he just borrow the name? Or,
a lot of the mega churches, and Pentecostal churches particularly, have the people have adopted biblical. The bishop is in the Bible.
Yes.
So they've adopted this as the name of a church leader.
Right.
Okay.
If you want to be more important than the preacher, say you're the bishop. Say, I don't know. Yeah. That's possible. You can borrow that. Yeah.
Huh.
Mm-hmm. When we get to looking at the prosperity and the mega churches, they've evolved as a whole separate kind of thing.
Yes.
They've mixed and matched and used what they can use, and so we'll look at that when we get to that section. Good question.
And that's my report. The Lord have mercy.
Okay, so this week you've got a reading report on Black Methodism. Some of you haven't gotten your reading reports in for previous weeks, and I'd like to see you get them, but it's just 1 point each, 10% of your grade total. It's not huge, but it's a way of keeping up and keeping your mind connected with what we've done along. Then it becomes a part of your reviewing for the final. You got a question?
I do. Did we have one due last Friday?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What was that one?
It would have been the Christianization of the enslaved Africans before the formation of the denominations. So from the introduction of Pin and Pin.
Okay.
And you can see that when you go to remember, you can go to the module under Canvas, and each module of each week has very clearly what the assignments are, what what papers do, what the questions are due for the papers, all right there.
Okay. Okay, so
And if you don't know, you can always ask me again. That's fine.
Okay, because I missed the paper. Oh well, that's terrible. Okay, I'm gonna get that other one in too.
That'd be good.
But,
okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, I got one more question.
Yes, sir.
How much did you pay per each one of these pen and pen books?
I think they were about somewhere around $20. Some of them were less than that because they were used.
Oh, okay, because I'll probably be sending Miss Keisha a check for my book.
Okay. Did it get messed up? Did it get messed up?
On purpose.
Oh, you're underlining your stuff. That's good.
When I'm reading, me and my highlighter just has a field day.
Okay. That's good.
I'll be sending her a check for this book. It's highlighted everywhere.
That's all right. Well, and if you want to turn it back in, next student who gets it gets helped. That's all. That's the nature of borrowed books. All right.
Would it possibly in your next class? Is it something that you kind of go to as a reference even in your next class that you teach?
No, this one's the second half of the history of Christianity. So we don't talk about this one in the first half. It's a different picture.
Okay.
Well, gang, this has been a very fun class today.
Really? It's not what you said about Monday. Monday you said back the dump truck in and just dumped it on you.
Well,
so I'm trying to help that out.
So you're throwing things out there, and we're hoping Lucretia gets better because Dr. Sawyer needs somebody to argue with, and he really missed you.
That's right, yeah. So
on fire.
Next week, we're going to talk about the Baptists. And who was it supposed to be to helping us learn about the Baptists? Lucretia and somebody else? Was that it?
I think I said I wanted to do Baptist, but I actually want to do prosperity because it's just real interesting to me.
Okay.
I think I was with the Baptist group.
All right.
So when are we doing these sessions? The 10-minute.
You've been doing it this week.
Oh.
You have been helping us along. Thank you for your research.
Mm-hmm.
It's been
well, I must apologize.
You're working on it. Don't worry about it.
Well, for those who did not get to know, I had turned in my final paper on Monday. And I must apologize, Dr. Sawyer, because for some reason I misinterpreted what he wanted and I didn't go far enough.
Wait a minute. Your final paper?
Yeah.
He's way ahead of the game.
Take a run and hit the wall and fall out your chair. Are you serious?
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Everybody works their own thing.
I'm getting ready to turn in the final draft again.
Wow.
We're having way too much fun here. It's time to quit.
All righty. Everybody stay safe. See you next week.
Right. Maya, it's great to see you in person. Thank you for using your thing. See you Monday.
Bye, y'all. Have a great day. Week.